Hello, and welcome to Roman Army in Israel and the Bible. My name is Christopher Zeichman, recent PhD graduate from the University of Toronto, where I presently teach along at Ryerson University. I'd like to spend some time with you in this class thinking about sort of the role of the military in ancient Judea, Galilee, Botania, and sort of how that's depicted in the Bible. We're going to be covering a variety of interesting and complex topics to hopefully give you a better sense for these very interesting figures throughout the Bible. So what I'd like to in this first segment of class is to think about why this is worth studying in the first place. It may not be an obvious point of studying, but I think there's a lot of interesting things that are going on here. So kind of questions we'll be thinking about, namely, who are these men that Jesus, the early Christians, and their peers interacted with? Why are military metaphors so prevalent in the New Testament? And how did Jews perceive the Romans, and often vice versa as well? What was the nature of this relationship? If you've seen various Christian movies, whether it's Jesus movies or kind of movies about Paul or something along those lines, you may notice that soldiers often have an antagonistic relationship with early Christians, but often very positive as well. So it's kind of a mixed bag in the New Testament. So we'll be exploring why that may exactly be the case. Not only in the context of the Bible, but in the context of ancient Israel as well. Looking at a few important examples here, kind of one of the most famous and one of the most important examples that we'll spend more time talking about towards the end of this class is the example of the centurion at the cross. I quote here the Gospel of Mark, the earliest surviving of the canonical Gospels. And it gives this story, and it culminates, Jesus is about to die, and then the story goes with a loud cry, Jesus breathed his last. The curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, and a centurion, I would note here that the Greek words are pretty interesting for reasons we'll see about later. It's the word centurion, which you may notice is very much like the English word centurion, who stood there in front of Jesus, saw how he died, and said, surely this man was the Son of God. What's important about the word centurion here, we'll spend more time on this, is that even though the New Testament, as you know, is written in Greek, it's actually a Latin word that's used here. And we'll find that often in the New Testament, those things that are talked about the military, those Greek words will let go, and then instead of using Greek, they'll end up using Latin words to talk about these sort of important social institutions. Spend more time with that later. Likewise, I want to point to another thing that's interesting here. Surely this man was the Son of God. What would it mean for a Roman centurion to say this? What would it mean to use language of Son of God for a man who probably wasn't Jewish, but likely a pagan? What would that mean for him to say Jesus was the Son of God? There's, in fact, a wide variety of debate stances on this issue. Is it something where it's a sincere proclamation? I've converted and now I recognize this man as the son of the Jewish God. Is it something where he's being sarcastic, where he sees this man die, he's like, oh, some son of God this guy was, or is it something where he's recognizing the defeat of Rome, like surely this man and not Caesar is the Son of God? So there's a variety of possibilities here, and I think we might get a better sense for which of these are more likely and which of these are less likely through the course by getting a sense of how the military functioned, what its relationship to Judaism was, and how the Gospel of Mark and the other Gospels tend to depict these soldiers and other military men. Another example that's pretty famous as well is in the Gospel of Luke. Has a parallel in the Gospel of Matthew chapter 5, but Luke's version spends a bit more time thinking about the soldier in particular and kind of the relationship between the centurion and his kind of the Jewish populace at the time. Again, I quote here the version from Luke. When Jesus had finished saying all this to the people who were listening, he entered Capernaum. And there's a centurion servant. Again, note here that the word, unlike the last one, was centurion, hecaton tarkos, which is in fact the Greek word for centurion. So leader of 100 is what it is. So hecaton means 100. Archos means leader. So leader of 100. There's a centurion servant whom his master valued highly, was sick and about to die. The centurion heard of Jesus and sent some elders to the Jews to him, asking him to come and heal his servant. When they came to Jesus, they pleaded earnestly to him, saying, quote, "This man deserves to have you do this because he loves our nation and has built our synagogue." So Jesus went with them. Again, this would seem to be a quite positive depiction of at least one particular military officer. And we'll look at kind of a few parallels with this notion of synagogue patronage, kind of close relationship to the Jewish people. We'll see that that's something that happens on occasion in ancient Judea and Galilee. Not particularly common, but it'll be some interesting points of comparison that we'll see there. And in fact, these are hardly the two examples. So we looked at two centurions just a moment ago, but there's also Cornelius of the Italian cohort in Acts 10, who ends up being the first pagan Christian. So there's a long discussion between Peter and others about sort of, are Jews, should they be able to take in Gentiles into the early Christian movement? And in fact, Peter has a dream, and ultimately he's convinced that yes, we should do that. And this centurion Cornelius ends up being the first pagan convert to Christianity. There's also two anonymous centurions in Acts 23 who work with Claudius Lysias, the tribune of the region. And finally, one more centurion as well, which is Julius of the Augustan cohort, who's very important. And we're going to see there's a lot of symbolism at play there with Julius. Julius helps bring Paul to Rome. Paul's a prisoner at that point, and even though he's keeping watch over Paul to make sure he doesn't escape, he also does a good job of making sure that Paul is treated safely and not harassed too badly by the others who blame him for the shipwreck that is happening on their way to Rome. In fact, he ends up being another exemplary centurion. In fact, Luke and Acts in general, both written by the same author, we'll see have a very positive depiction of the military. That said, there's kind of negative depictions as well. So there's the slaughter of the innocents in the Gospel of Matthew, where Herod the Great's soldiers find Jesus to be a threat, and so he sends soldiers to go kill all the babies. There's also various soldiers at the crucifixion who mock Jesus, quite negative, whereas the centurion at the cross, who seems to recognize Jesus as the Son of God, would be a positive thing. These other soldiers who mock him, who offer him bad wine, these other soldiers who decide that they want to cast lots for Jesus' clothing, not really treating him with any respect at all. So there's kind of a variety of depictions with that. We'll also look briefly at John the Baptist preaching to soldiers. We'll see in Luke chapter 3, verse 14, he has John the Baptist is preaching to different groups, and they ask what they should all do. And the soldiers are one group that ask him how they should go about their lives. And in fact, John has some pretty interesting advice to them. And I think it kind of shows the funny role that soldiers had in society. In fact, the advice that he gives them is more or less be satisfied with their wages and don't take money from people. To us, that might be kind of a very funnily low standard, right? You know, be happy with the amount of money you're making and just don't harass people and steal money from them. But we'll see, in fact, that was a pretty significant problem in ancient Judea and in the ancient Mediterranean more broadly, that Roman soldiers in particular were known for the fact that they would steal money and so on from the various people that they were occupying at the time. So we'll kind of spend some time contextualizing that. Moreover, there's the tribune Claudius Lysias that I mentioned before, who in Acts 23, he kind of oversees the arrest of Paul and this question about Paul being a Roman citizen and how that's supposed to be dealt with. And finally, there's various other soldiers as well, so those that execute John the Baptist and those that execute James, the brother of Jesus. This is just a handful of the many examples. All of this to say that soldiers are quite frequent in the New Testament, narrative literature in particular, but we don't always notice them, that they're often in the background, and in many times that the texts themselves kind of downplay them. So for instance, when we look at the slaughter of the innocents, we'll notice that, in fact, the soldiers themselves aren't really mentioned, but Herod is the one who's depicted as responsible for it, not those soldiers who actually go about killing the babies. In fact, this is pretty typical of what we see at the time, that the commander is thought of in charge. And we're going to look at kind of more examples, what this means, kind of contextualizing it, taking things a bit slower, and noticing some interesting things about these. We're going to ask plenty of other questions also about sort of the social context of this. So who were these men? So if you're interested in doing a passion play at your church or a depiction of sort of the life of Jesus, this might give you a better sense for how these might have functioned as characters. We'll be asking things like, what was their background? What did these soldiers think of Judaism? What was their religion? What was important to them as individuals, hopes, desires, and so on? Why would these men join the military? What would get them to do that? You know, there's many different occupations available in the ancient world. Why would they choose the military? We're going to see there's often pretty specific reasons for it. Why are centurions so prevalent? So as I noted before, you know, there's Cornelius, the two anonymous centurions, Julius of the Augustan cohort, in addition to the centurion at Capernaum in Matthew and Luke, and the centurion at the cross in Matthew, Mark, and Luke as well. So why are there so many centurions? Really, they don't talk about the specific rank of many soldiers other than centurions in the New Testament. So why are they so prevalent? And we'll see that there's actually pretty clear reasons why they want to focus on centurions. As a point of contrast, if the centurions, there's so many of them, and they're almost always good and positive figures, then why do common soldiers, kind of those common infantrymen, why are they always depicted negatively? Those are the ones who are, for instance, responsible for mocking Jesus at the crucifixion, for executing John the Baptist and James, the brother of Jesus, and so on. So these are men who are depicted quite cruel. So there's kind of an interesting contrast that there's no one depiction of soldiers, but often some are positive and some are negative. So we're going to get a chance to kind of get in depth with some texts, as well as the social context and cultural context about why people in ancient Judea, Galilee, and Botania would be having this particular understanding of the military. Another interesting example where the soldiers don't exactly appear, but there's a military subtext to it, can be found in the story of the Gerasene demoniac, which we'll spend some more time on. This appears in Mark and Luke, with a similar version in the Gospel of Matthew as well that we'll spend some time looking at. And just to read that out loud, in the region of the Gerasenes, Yeshua encountered a man influenced by a spirit. This man lived in the cemetery, was violent and exceedingly strong. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he fell on his knees in front of him. He shouted at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of God Most High? In God's name, don't torture me." For Jesus had said to him, "Come out of this man, you impure spirit." And Jesus asked him, "What's your name?" Interestingly, for our purposes, is that the man who is possessed by this demonic spirit replies, "My name is Legion, for we are many." Again, this is a pretty interesting example because, as you may know, legions were kind of the basic military unit in the Roman Empire. That these were the kind of the main military forces. We're going to look at those, and this is the name of this particular demon. And I would further note here that the word that's used, legion, as you might guess, is very similar to the word legion in English, and this is, as we noted earlier, a Latin word actually that is used rather than a Greek word. We'll look at why that may be the case, and we'll also be asking the question of whether or not the story is trying to say something about the Roman army in ancient Judea, ancient Israel, and thinking a bit more about that. Another example here in the book of Revelation, I looked, and there before me was a white horse. Its rider held a bow, and he was given a crown. And he rode out as a conqueror bent on conquest. When the Lamb opened the second seal, I heard a second living creature say, "Come." And another horse came out, fiery red one. Its rider was given power to take peace from the earth and to make people kill each other. To him was given a large sword. So again, a military type imagery here with a couple of the riders and Revelation. In fact, Revelation has a lot of military imagery. There seems to be some connection in Revelation between the demonic and evil forces on the one hand and Rome on the other hand. They seem to be almost two sides of the same coin in the book of Revelation, and this military aspect of it is actually quite strong there as well.